The 70s were a time when television would seem to try anything at least once. Science fiction was one of the main genres where this was very true. Thanks to the success of series like Star Trek and Lost in Space, there was a deluge of offbeat, actually good genre TV. Typically, it was with some sort of tie-in or angle to get children to watch and or buy something. And just wait until Star Wars happened. But the early 70s would find a new kind of hero to grab the hearts and minds of kids across the country, and he'd bring with him some of the coolest toys around, because he was literally made up of metal and plastic himself. The $6 Million Man would jump into television history with a premise that was brilliant, cutting edge, and perfect TV fodder. It would also make a heartthrob and icon out of a guy named Lee Majors, who would eventually play the father to our Lord and Savior, Ash Williams. But that's another show. On this episode of Gone But Not Forgotten, we have the technology and capability to make the first episode all about the $6 Million Man. This will be that episode. The $6 Million Man actually started as a novel named Cyborg, and no, this has no connection to Jean-Claude Van Damme's 1989 cinematic masterpiece. Cyborg was written by Martin Caidin and was followed fairly closely by the eventual TV series. In the book, Steve Austin is an astronaut who is horribly maimed after a plane crash from which he somehow survives. After the accident, Rudy Wells, a doctor and master of high-tech bionics, works with the Office of Strategic Operations, along with Oscar Goldman, one of the high-ups at the OSO, to put Steve back together again. The book veers from what would happen in the TV series somewhat, with Austin having some interesting augmentations like a radio in his rib, a removable eyeball with a camera in it, and a finger that can shoot poison darts.
Pull my finger. Let go.
While, yes, there's a lot to poke fun at here, the book doesn't shy away from the more serious aspects of Steve Austin's resurrection, as it were. When he realizes how injured he is, he tries to kill himself. He hates basically being made into an indentured servant in order to pay back the costs of his new body and abilities. But Steve would wind up accepting his new enhancements and becoming a more willing and happy to participate spy and agent for the OSO. The Cyborg book series would actually continue on, while the $6 Million Man TV series was airing. But it would not actually follow the storyline of the show. The world of the novels was far different, with a total of 3 books following the original. The $6 Million Man was a made-for-TV film which would be used as a jumping-off pilot that aired on ABC on March 7th, 1973. In the pilot episode, as in the novel, Steve Austin is injured during an accident that nearly kills him. He loses his right arm and both legs and is blinded in his left eye. Austin is put back together by Rudy Wells for the OSO. In this first film, there are some definite differences from what would later be associated with the series. There were actually 3 made-for-TV movies that preceded the show, and the first had some notable cast differences in characters. The biggest would be the lack of Oscar Goldman, played by Richard Anderson. In the TV movie, the character who was in charge of the OSO is Oliver Spencer, and was played by the always awesome Darren McGavin. Also in this version, Rudy Wells will be played by TV character staple Martin Balsam. The character of Rudy would change over the course of the films and series 3 times. First with Balsam, then Alan Oppenheimer, and Martin E. Brooks. The iconic sound effects wouldn't be a part of this first entry into the series either. The TV movie was a ratings smash, and was followed by 2 more TV films that same year. The second film, airing in October, would give us Oscar and Alan Oppenheimer as Rudy 2.0. This would also see the introduction of the OSI. In November, the third made-for-TV movie would air. As said, these original films would be edited to 2-parters and added to the series run with some additional content. The titles for the made-for-TV films would be The $6 Million Man, The Moon and the Desert, Wine, Women and War, and the Solid Gold Kidnapping. The official first episode of The $6 Billion Man would air on January 18th, 1974. The series would follow Austin as he would go on missions for the OSI and would be filled with spy work and rescues, along with some interesting surprises along the way.
Sure liked it better when we were on the same team.
Of note, the second film was written by TV legend Glenn A. Larson. The first season of the series would quickly introduce the familiar sound effects and special effects that fans were familiar with. You know the ones.
Hear me. Come on in.
And the all-important intro where Oscar tells us that
we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We can make him better than he was. Better, stronger, faster.
It's interesting to note, the first voice you hear during that opening narration is actually producer Harve Bennett saying,
"Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive."
Bennett worked in the TV industry for years and would be responsible or involved with some of the classics of TV world, with the likes of Mod Squad and a number of made-for-TV movies under his belt. He'd go on to bring to the big screen one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. Certainly the best Star Trek film ever made, The Wrath of Khan, in 1982. Along with Bennett's future connection to Star Trek, The $6 Million Man would have connections throughout the genre and also get some major accolades. The first TV movie would be nominated for a Hugo Award. Some of the writers throughout the series would include D.C. Fontana, Peter Allen Fields, Mark Frost, and Kenneth Johnson. Kenneth Johnson would be one of the show's producers and is the man behind a few shows we've discussed here on Gone But Not Forgotten. But as a writer and producer on The $6 Million Man, Johnson would contribute one of the biggest pieces of the series' history when he introduced Jamie Summers in Season 2's two-parter, The Bionic Woman. Jamie would become a love interest for Steve. Lee Majors would actually sing the love theme for the duo called Sweet Jamie in multiple episodes, just like he'd sing the theme for The Fall Guy a few years later.
Our friendship is finished, that's true.
Who would share a similar tragic fate, which would lead to her becoming said Bionic Woman. When a skydiving accident nearly kills the tennis player, Jamie goes through the same procedure as Austin. Jamie would become a returning character on the show after supposedly dying in part 2 of the storyline, which would also include Steve proposing to Jamie. I don't want to go too far into the world of the Bionic Woman as well. She got her own series and deserves her own episode, so keep an eye out for that. Needless to say, Jamie Summers will become a major player in the franchise, and other Bionic characters, both good and bad, will become part of the lore. One of the more interesting of these would be Barney, the $7 Million Man. Barney is played by actor Monty Markham, who ironically was who the producers originally wanted to play Steve Austin before Lee Majors won the role. Some other standouts from the series episodes are, of course, the Fembots. No, not those. These Fembots. The creepy robot wiring revealed faces of these things are just, well, creepy. The Fembots were part of a recurring group of robots who would fight both Steve and Jamie over the course of the series. One of the most well-known, insane, and neat episodes from the show, though, are The Secret of Bigfoot, written by, yet again, Kenneth Johnson. This episode has Steve taking on Bigfoot. Interesting fact, he was played this first time by the legendary Andre the Giant. The design and look of Bigfoot in this is pretty awesome, and more than a little scary for a kid. The story involves Bigfoot, aliens, and earthquakes. It's a fan favorite, and there's lots of reasons why. But you only really need to remember Andre the Giant is Bigfoot, and that should be enough. The episode was so popular that a hilarious homage of it was on the Venture Brothers. Bigfoot will return again the following season in The Return of Bigfoot. This would actually be a crossover event with the Bionic Woman that season. But instead of Andre the Giant, Ted Cassidy would take over the role of Bigfoot, aka Sasquatch. Lee Majors' real-life wife and fellow TV icon, the late Farrah Fawcett, would appear in a number of episodes of the show as different characters. While Steve and Jamie were the Bionic Power Couple, that didn't stop Steve or Jamie, for that matter, finding other love interests. But we always knew they'd end up together eventually. Lee Majors was, before being cast as Steve Austin, really known for westerns. He had a major role in the series The Big Valley and had done turns in Gunsmoke and other TV series and films. But it was really the $6 Million Man that made him into the pop culture icon and TV legend he is today. Majors is still acting and even got nominated for a Saturn Award for his co-starring role as Bruce Campbell's daddy in Ash vs. Evil Dead. I mean, who else could have done it, right?
The only thing I didn't like about it is he started calling me Pop. Now he still calls me Pop.
It's an endearing term, Pop.
Lindsay Wagner would play Jamie Summers. Wagner, like Majors, had done some film work, most notably in The Paper Chase and several TV guest roles before bringing Jamie to life. Richard Anderson, who portrayed Oscar Goldman, had a ton of films under his belt before becoming part of the OSI, at one point appearing on an episode of The Big Valley with Majors. But it would be as Oscar Goldman that he'd be best known for, playing the boss of the Bionic crew, who himself had a heart of gold. The show would have a list of guest stars a mile long of familiar faces and massive talent. Besides the aforementioned Farrah Fawcett and dueling Bigfoots, there would be John Saxon, William Shatner, George Foreman, Sonny Bono, Eric Estrada, and Greg Evigan, just to name a few. Glory in the 70s, kids. It was a magic time. The $6 Million Man would last for a total of 5 seasons. In that run, it would become a massive hit and would release some of the greatest toys ever. Maskatron was a sort of meshing of all the robot nemesis in the show and came with faces you could switch, including Oscar and Steve. I think this other face is supposed to be John Saxon's, but I'm not sure. You could pop his head off. The Steve Austin doll is just freaking neat and had an eye you could look through like a telescope and a removable arm plate. There are different versions of him with different bionic abilities. Bigfoot got his own toy as well, which could pop open his chest to show all of his electronics inside. Oscar got his own toy, which came with, rather oddly, an exploding briefcase. There were play sets and even extra bionic parts for Steve, which you could buy and pop off his legs and put on. There were vehicles too, as well as a Play-Doh set. Basically, the $6 Million Man knew how to make some bank when it came to the kids. Books, comics, records, you name it, you could probably find Steve Austin on it. The series would end in 1978, but it actually sort of didn't. Flash forward to 1987, and NBC brought back together Steve and Jamie for the return of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. It was quite the family affair, with Lee Majors II, Majors' son, playing an OSI agent, but funnily enough, not Steve Austin's son in the TV movie. That role went to Tom Shanley, who, in a continuing wave of bad luck for the Austins, gets nearly killed in a crash and has bionics added to his body just like his father. The film had a pretty decent budget of nearly $5 million. It was actually a possible pilot for a new series focusing on Steve's newly bionic son Michael. Martin Landau played the lead villain, who was part of a new group called Fortress. While the series never materialized, the TV film was a big enough hit to get another one made. Bionic Showdown, The $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, was released in 1989 and would see production move to Canada. But also joining the Bionic family is a gal by the name of Sandra Bullock. Yep, that's right, Sandra Bullock. Once again, this was another attempt at a new series, this time with a newly bionic woman in the guise of Bullock's character, Kate. But, as the previous film, there wasn't enough interest in producing a full series. But also, like the last film, there was enough to do one more TV movie. Bionic Ever After aired in 1994 and follows the dual proposal of marriage from Showdown, with Steve and Jamie planning on getting married. But, of course, there's always some sort of hostage situation to put a wrench into the works. Also, Jamie's bionics are failing, and she needs an upgrade. This would be the last of the Bionic films. Wagner mandated that she and Majors get married in this one or she wouldn't do it. Also, a nice bit of trivia, this aired on CBS, which means the $6 Million Man had appeared on all 3 of what used to be the major networks of the day. Just as one more aside, I honestly thought this one was filmed in Canada too, but it appears it was South Carolina. I bring this up because the also awesome Geordie Johnson plays one of the main bad guys here. So yes, Dracula and Klaus from Dracula the series were two of the last villains to take on Steve Austin. Bionic Ever After was a nice ending for two of TV's unique and greatest heroes who deserved their happy ending. The $6 Million Man has never been remade or retooled. Not to say no one hasn't tried. Mark Wahlberg has been ready to take on the $6 billion man for a while now. Kevin Smith's failed screenplay was adapted to a great comic series, but there's been no traction on the property for years, so the feature film version of Steve Austin has yet to take flight and crash, as would need to happen. Honestly, I'm sort of glad. Lee Majors was great in this role in this type of series, one with aliens, robots, and spy tech. Really can't be replicated today without someone doing it just to mock it or wink at the camera. The $6 Million Man relied on a good and fun story that's just happened to have a neat gimmick. It was entertaining, but also well written with characters that you cared about. It was a natural progression from shows like Star Trek and Batman. Technology that could be, and now actually is, shown helping people. It was great for younger and older viewers, which is why it was able to be as big a hit as it was and still be a favorite for fans today. The series was released on DVD and is now available to stream on Peacock, and it looks great. If you've never checked out The $6 Million Man, I highly recommend it. Lee Majors created a likable and fantastic character in Steve Austin. Yes, he was a rugged type, but he also had a heart and cared about the people he loved. He was funny and charming and made a fantastic toy. It's one of those roles that would be hard to replicate or recast. I just can't see it. So yes, sometimes you can't make it better or stronger. Sometimes it's perfect just the way it is. Previously, we've covered the iconic $6 Million Man on Gone But Not Forgotten. It's only right that we also showcase Steve Austin's equally amazing bionic cohort, the Bionic Woman, who is as popular as the $6 Million Man and was an important piece of TV history for a number of reasons. It would give women, girls, and guys a new perspective on just how powerful a woman could be, not only in a robotically enhanced strength, but also in their character. Jamie Summers was something special, and not even a TV death could keep her down. On this episode of Gone But Not Forgotten, listen close as we tell the story of the Bionic Woman. The Bionic Woman herself was introduced in Season 2 of The $6 Million Man, already an important part of Steve Austin's life. Jamie Summers and Steve had a relationship from their younger years, and upon their meeting again in this episode, become romantically involved once more. On a date skydiving with Steve, Jamie's chute doesn't deploy, and she's horribly injured. Due to this, Steve goes to his crew, begging for Jamie to be fitted with bionics to keep her alive. But Jamie's condition isn't as stable as Steve's was. Due to her newly minted bionics malfunctioning, Jamie has a blood clot in her brain that gives her horrible headaches. Eventually, between her bionics malfunction and the hemorrhage, she loses control and collapses. Jamie dies on the operating table, and it devastates Steve. It's interesting here, as the entire sequence of Steve chasing Jamie down happens during a thunderstorm. It makes me think of the Bride of Frankenstein quite a bit, which makes sense when you think of Jamie being put back together as she was. No one else in the world is like Steve and Jamie. The scene of Jamie in the operating room is pretty devastating for not only Steve, but for fans of the show, and everyone wanted her back. So with a bit of TV magic and cryogenics, Jamie Summers was brought back to life in the next season of The $6 Million Man. But it wasn't what would be called a happy reunion. Kenneth Johnson created Jamie and wrote the original two-part episode. He would write her comeback for the now classic two-part episode, The Return of the Bionic Woman. Steve and Jamie are completely star-crossed lovers. Sadly, Steve finds out the hard way that he's been lied to about Jamie still being alive. This is after he's been in another horrible accident, which causes damage to his legs, where he's put in the same hospital as Jamie. It turns out that the scientists put Jamie into a cryogenic sleep until the blood clot in her brain could be removed. The issue is this causes Jamie to forget her accident, and more importantly, her relationship with Steve. Eventually, Steve realizes that his involvement in Jamie's life is causing her to have horrible headaches and pain. Even though it destroys him emotionally, he decides the only thing he can do is give her up and have her moved to another location. The following year, Jamie would get her own series on ABC, with The Bionic Woman premiering in January of 1976. The new series finds Jamie heading back to the ranch that Steve's parents own and taking a job for a cover as a teacher at a local Air Force base. The first 2 episodes of the new series were written by Johnson. It doesn't take long, though, for Jamie to start working with OSI on missions. This seems like it is going against what was established in the last episodes featuring Jamie. It sort of does, but we can assume she's building back new memories and strengths. Jamie Summers was played by Lindsay Wagner. Wagner started working as a model, and in 1971, she signed a contract with Universal Studios and worked as a contract player. Wagner worked as a model in Los Angeles and gained some television experience by appearing as a hostess in Playboy After Dark. She later wound up working on TV shows like Adam 12, Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law, The FBI, Sarge, and Night Gallery. But it was her work on the Rockford Files that got her the role. Producer-writer Kenneth Johnson had been looking for that lead for the series. He saw many actresses, but he was impressed by Wagner's performance on the Rockford Files. He said he felt she was charming and down to earth. He said the audience wanted a hero who could be the girl next door. So Wagner was hired, and that's when the magic began. The series would see Jamie running up against a number of interesting scenarios and pretty strange plotlines. This would include the fembots, aliens, her own double who was played by actress Lindsay Wagner, and takes on Steve's most famous foe, Bigfoot. Jamie would also, in the 3rd and final season of the series, gain a new friend in the form of Maximilian, aka Max, one of OSI's first experiments in bionics, and who is a big ol' adorable German Shepherd. It becomes apparent that Jamie loves dogs, because when she finds out that Max is scheduled to be put down since they suspect him of rejecting his bionics, well, you can add PETA hero to Jamie's resume. It turns out Max isn't actually rejecting his bionics. He's been traumatized by a fire in the lab where he had his modifications. Over the course of the first 2 episodes of season 3, he comes to face his fear and helps save the day. This also shows OSI scientists that they were in the wrong about the dog, and they changed their minds on putting him down. Max the Bionic Dog was actually at one point going to have his own TV series. The mid to late 70s were big times for dogs, so this probably would have worked. But with the 3rd season being the final one for the Bionic Woman and the cancellation of the $6 Million Man, it wasn't meant to be. The 3rd season of the series was its last, and it would actually bow out only a few months after the finale of the $6 Million Man. But the 2 series would not be on the same networks. In the first case of this happening in the history of television, as far as I know, The Bionic Woman was canceled on ABC after its 2nd season and would be picked up by NBC for its final. This would cause a problem though for there to be a $6 Million Man showing up in the series. Unlike Buffy and Angel, which wasn't hampered by a network switch and would allow the characters to show up on each other's series, ABC wouldn't allow Lee Majors to show up on a rival network show, as it was stipulated in his contract with the show. But this didn't stop other characters from doing so. This would be one of the first times characters would show up on 2 rival networks while appearing in different series, with Oscar Goldman and Rudy Wells, aka Richard Anderson and Martin E. Brooks, to appear in both series. This caused there to be some issues in continuing the love story of Jamie and Steve. So in the 3rd season, the late Christopher Stone would be cast as Chris, a love interest and partner for Jamie. No, that's not Tom Atkins. This is the gent who turned into a werewolf in The Howling. Tom Atkins fought teenage alien slug zombies. Lindsay Wagner was awesome as Jamie Summers, and she was a hero and role model to women and girls during this time. The 70s saw a lot of powerful female role models appear on television. This was the decade that saw live-action Wonder Woman and Linda Carter and Charlie's Angels. Jamie was a lot like these other women in that she tried not to use brute strength too often when it came to issues she was solving. She was smart, she was kind, and she, like Steve, had to come to terms with who she was now with her bionics. In fact, the last episode of the series had Jamie wanting to leave the OSI in order to focus on herself and her own mental health and well-being, something the agency wasn't willing to do. But Jamie eventually did get them to agree to her continuing to work with them on her terms. For Wagner herself though, working on the series wasn't quite so easy. Lindsay Wagner had to do a lot of her own stunts, where Lee Majors actually had been a stuntman, something he'd sing about and portray on screen eventually in The Fall Guy. Wagner wasn't, but she went ahead and did them anyway, even when it came to a dangerous helicopter stunt that wasn't quite to the level of security it should have been, without a security harness in place and falling to an airbag. The character of Jamie, as I said, was important for young women. The team behind the show wanted anything that was tied in the ways of toys and merchandise to also show Jamie as more than just a pretty face. Like the $6 Million Man toys, the Bionic Woman toys had neat tie-ins to the character's powers. For example, if you turn Jamie's head, you could hear the sound effect of her super hearing. Her arm had an area where you could see the circuitry in it. But Jamie, unlike Steve, also could be bought with a mission purse. And yes, actually it came with makeup and a wallet with Bionic bucks. Also, for some reason, instead of a picture of Steve in her wallet, she had a picture of Oscar. Mission purse aside, the Bionic Woman toys were pretty neat. Jamie had a sports car and even a house you could get, but also a Bionic beauty salon. And no, I'm not making that up, no matter how much I wish I was. You could get a Fembot toy as well as an 18-inch tall Jamie, and one of those hairstyling Head and Shoulders toys, where you could do up disembodied Jamie's hair. Styling was apparently a big deal here, but it was pretty cool they made Bionic Woman temporary tattoos for girls, so they could pretend they'd lost their own limbs and had them replaced, just like Jamie. Much like $6 Million Man and a number of series in the 70s, the Bionic Woman had a number of interesting guest stars to show up on missions with Jamie. Some notable and knowable names include Andy Griffith, Terry Kaiser, Christy McNichol, Hoyt Axton, Abe Vigoda, Dan O'Herlihy, and Julie Newmar, to name a few. Richard Anderson and Martin E. Brooks would continue their roles as Oscar Goldman and Rudy Wells, as they would on $6 Million Man, as I previously mentioned. As we discussed in the $6 Million Man episode, Steve and Jamie would return in made-for-TV movies starting in 1987. In the second of these, 1989's Bionic Showdown, the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, a new Bionic Woman would be created in the form of Sandra Bullock. At one point, there was talk of giving her character Kate Mason a series, but this didn't happen. Steve and Jamie would actually tie the knot in Bionic Ever After. This would be the last time the characters would be seen as played by the original actors. Notice I said the original actors. The Bionic Woman has the distinction of having been rebooted and remade into a new series, unlike the $6 Million Man. Back in 2007, for 8 whole episodes spread over about a month of time, NBC aired The Bionic Woman. The series starred Michelle Ryan as Jamie Summers, who is now a bartender and whose boyfriend is the scientist who fits her out with cybernetics after an accident nearly kills her, possibly a nod to the fact that Lindsay Wagner's younger sister motivated her to take the role of the original Bionic Woman. In this series, Jamie has a younger sister she takes care of. The series had a really strong sci-fi pedigree, with a cast that included Mark Shepard, Katie Sackhoff, and the late Miguel Ferrer, who apparently really loved being in charge of robotically enhanced superheroes brought back from the dead.
I fucking love that guy!
The series was produced in Canada, but didn't get much in the way of interest from viewers. The last nail in the coffin of the series was the writer's strike the same year it was aired. No further episodes were produced after the strike, and NBC pulled the plug on the series. Kenneth Johnson, the actual writer and creator of the original series, had nothing to do with it either, which probably didn't help matters. If you watch the show, you can see its wasted potential. Michelle Ryan is a great lead and Katie Sackhoff is an incredible villain, but the supporting cast was weak. Jamie's sister is an annoying teenager, always whining, and the supporting characters are as dull as wet paint. Sadly, we will never know if the series could have been saved. Currently, the only way to stream The Bionic Woman is to buy it on Amazon. However, if you're interested in great special features, you should buy the DVDs, which are still in print. So that leaves us here with that classic question, should The Bionic Woman return? It's apparent that it's hard to replicate what made the original so special. There's just something truly great about the original series, and Lindsay Wagner just brought something special to Jamie. There's also the fact that these shows were so unabashedly weird in the most wonderful way and embraced it. Bigfoot, aliens, bionic dogs, and friggin' fembots, man. These days, shows would bring plots like that in just for laughs, but the Bionic Woman played it straight and kept a charm you can't fake. You can change the name to Cybernetics to try and add some flash, but I'll take a slow motion run every time.